Caleb Downs is going to be one of the more interesting studies that we'll have in this year's NFL draft regarding positional value because he is a safety. But many will already tell you that if you're just looking on a board and asking who the best player in this year's draft is, for many people, it's Caleb Downs. So the question is, Caroline, how much do we have to account for the fact that the position he plays doesn't typically get drafted as high as Caleb Downs' talent would justify drafting?
I think there's two different schools of thought coming into play here of elite playmakers, blue chip players change your team and will be contributors for your team for the next 10 years. They'll be franchise players. They will be foundational pieces of your team moving forward. You need those kinds of players. I think there's also, though, comes into the conversation of value. Draft value is a real thing. It has to be. Because if you're drafting high enough, if you bad enough to be drafting high enough in the top 5, top 10, to be in the range to draft Caleb Downs, you don't want to be that bad for very long. Like, you don't want to be drafting at the top of the draft over the next 5 years. So you have to be thinking about what kind of player can make an impact for our team in the biggest way. Because Caleb Downs will make 32 teams in the NFL better. But that's the kind of prospect that I think he is. I think was the best defensive player in college football last year. And there are plenty of strong arguments to be made that Caleb Downs was the best player in college football this past year. But it's not a premier position. The positions that get paid in the NFL are those who throw the football, those who catch the football, and those two who hit the guy who throws the football. Quarterback, receiver, edge rusher. And the guys who protect the guy who throws the football, offensive lineman. It's not to say that Caleb Downs is invaluable because he's absolutely valuable. It's not to say that safety doesn't matter because it absolutely does. But if you're picking top 3 in the draft, you're probably pretty bad. And you probably have a lot of positions of need. What's going to help you right now? An elite receiver or an elite safety? I lean receiver, but that's my own personal football philosophy.
So number one, I'm going to put quarterback in a separate conversation for a second because
it's different.
Quarterback, I think, quarterback raises your floor more than any position in all of sports. If you have a great quarterback, it makes up for a lot of deficiencies. I'm torn on this, Caroline, because I think we both agree Caleb Downs. Like if we were drafting in a vacuum, I think there'd be a real argument for Caleb Downs being the first pick in the draft. Now, certainly that wouldn't make sense for a team like the Raiders. So we say that out loud. But the fact is, I'm with you. Safety shouldn't be a difference maker. But also, when you are terrible, part of the reason you're terrible is because your entire roster sucks. And at some point, what you need is improvement all over the place. I'm not sure any one position actually results in gratuitous improvement. Like, let's be honest for a second. You're right. Your logic is totally right. But when I look at wide receivers, my counter argument to that is I've watched T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, two of the best, miss the playoffs because that's a poorly constructed rest of the roster. So 2 wide receivers that are absolutely epic with one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL can't get you to the playoffs. If I look at offensive line, we see teams with great offensive lines that don't win a ton of football games. If I look at edge rushers, Myles Garrett and Max Crosby are 2 of the best edge rushers of their generation, and they sit home and watch the playoffs every year on TV. So, like, I hear you that it's a safety, and a safety doesn't win you football games. I just think I'm becoming more and more resigned to no one position other than quarterback actually does win you games. You have to get better every single year. I heard this as a Raiders fan, and I still hear it with Ashton Genty being drafted last year. And the number of times people say you don't draft a running back that high. And I get it. I understand that logic. The answer we got this year was, see, that's why you don't do it, because it doesn't win you games. I would ask everybody, do you think that a better left tackle would have made the Raiders a significantly better football? How many games does having a better left tackle win you if the rest of your roster sucks? So I honestly think sometimes we overcomplicate the top of the board. The top of the board, when you are picking top 10, if you have a chance at a Hall of Fame level player, take the Hall of Fame level player and then continue to just get better inch by inch, position by position. It's not a sexy answer, but I don't think any one position anymore other than quarterback results in enough wins to justify passing on a generational talent for another position.
But that's where I think we're kind of getting, blurry lines here, because I don't think one quarter or one position, even quarterback, can change a franchise. Look at Sam Darnold with the Jets. Sam Darnold had a bunch of nobodies, not even
Hmm,
starters in the NFL, and
good
he was
point.
terrible with the Jets and discarded. He just won a Super Bowl. So, like, even quarterbacks need pieces around them in order to truly change a franchise. No one guy is going to, take a truly terrible team with a bunch of guys that should be on practice squads and all of a sudden make them a playoff contender. If those are your expectations, that's just not fair. Like, a quarterback can't even do that. So, it's all about roster construction. It's all about year over year through the draft, whether in first round and all the way through all 7 rounds, through free agency. It's about roster construction. It's not just one puzzle piece. It's how does this one puzzle piece fit within the massive construct of a 53-man roster? That's where value comes into play, in my opinion. If you have a top 5 pick, that is invaluable currency in the NFL. But you also have to piece that with what pieces can we find that are reliable starters in rounds 2 through 4? What are pieces, veteran pieces that we can find in free agency that's not going to completely blow up our books? That's kind of how I'm looking at it. Is Caleb Downs the best safety in this class? Yes. Does Caleb Downs have the ability to be one of the best safeties in the history of the National Football League? Yes, I believe so. But also, can you find a viable starting safety in the second or third round? Yeah. Is he going to be better than Caleb Downs? Of course not, because Caleb Downs is just that kind of a special talent. So it's all about value. How can you get the most squeeze out of every single lemon of your most premier and valuable positions? And then how else can you supplement that? Like, I look at guard, for example. You don't see very many offensive guards going in the top 10 because that's just not a premier position. And we saw this with the Tennessee Titans. They drafted Peter Skoronski with the 11th overall pick, moved him over to guard. Uh, the Tennessee Titans are still in roster hell because they didn't take a positional player that could help them that year or the next 5 years. They took a guard, and you can find a guard in the third round. You can find a guard in the fifth round. You can find a guard in free agency at a bargain cost. So it's important to use that valuable capital you have and get the most value out of it. Look, Kyle Hamilton is incredibly valuable to that Baltimore Ravens team. I'm not saying he's not. But at the same time, like, how would you rank value on that Ravens team?
So you're right. I also think, though, to your point, you can find a guard in the second or third or fourth round. That's true. I don't trust bad teams to do that. I don't trust bad talent evaluators to find the right guys in the third or fourth round. And sometimes, to me, like, and this is, again, I'll go back to Brock Bowers a couple of years ago. Was it smart for the Raiders to pick a tight end in that draft? No, it wasn't necessarily position in need, and I'm not sure how much tight ends win you football games. He was the best player, and it was clear he was the best player, and hasn't won any games for the Raiders, certainly. But the Raiders are bad because they draft poorly in the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth round. They draft poorly over and over and over again. Bad teams. The Titans are bad, not just because of Skoronski, but because when you look at their draft class as a whole over the course of 4 years, there's barely anybody left in the league from some of that, right? Like, so to me, you're right, but I don't know that I trust a team that's consistently picking in the top 5 to actually find that player somewhere else. I don't know that I trust a team that's perennially awful to turn around and find the safety in the third round that's maybe not Caleb Downs, but he's pretty damn close. So they got another player and they got a starting safety in the third round. I don't, when you look at the teams picking at the top of this year's draft, the Raiders always at the top of the draft, the Jets always at the top of the draft, Arizona always at the top of the draft, Tennessee always at the top of the draft, Cleveland in there, the Giants, who might be a little bit better, always. We're talking about the same 6 teams that suck all the time. I don't trust them to get the third round, fourth round pick right. So sometimes I just want you to take the layup because maybe it's not the most efficient thing. But damn, I just want you to get a better player. Like, you need so many things if you are the New York Jets that, man, I don't want you to pass on if the Jets board tells them that Caleb Downs is a beast and nobody even touches it. If he is clearly number 1 on their board, take Caleb Downs because, my God, you're the Jets because
Yeah,
you need talent everywhere.
of course. Like, you go by your board. If he's your number one guy on your board, and if you have him ranked as the number one player in the draft, and you can get him if you're the Giants at 5, you take him. I'm not saying don't take Caleb Downs. I'm not saying don't take a safety or a corner or any non-premier position at a premier draft place just because it's not a premier position, if you actually think that this guy is going to be a franchise difference maker, which I think Caleb Downs is. But you bring up Brock Bowers. I think he's different too because Brock Bowers wasn't a tight end, isn't a tight end. Like Brock Bowers is
Fair.
so much more than that. But I could also show you Kyle Pitts and how Kyle Pitts has largely not done a whole lot for the Atlanta Falcons. So and you bring up not trusting franchises, bad franchises. That's true. But I think that's a different conversation. That's not on Caleb Downs if he gets drafted by a team that can't draft and can't develop and can't identify talent. That's a front office issue. And I think that's the foundation and probably the root of a lot of issues of bad teams in the NFL. Bad talent evaluators, bad general managering, and bad ownership.